can't complain.
Here extra early because I never know what the
Okay.
Where would I find? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I just want to thank everybody for coming here today and taking the time to appear in front of us, state the cases for what we have in front of us, and for the members of the board to deliberate. And as you can tell, you're kind of coming back from vacation. Deliberate with non-prejudice, and appreciate everyone today. Thank you. And that 10-minute sprint on my bicycle to this morning. I don't have a car today, so I had to bike. Okay, so we're going to open the public hearing. Approval of the minutes. Start with approval of the minutes. Anyone have any changes, questions, issues?
Move to approve.
I have one.
Second.
I have one change. Page 4, policy discussion, LDC glitch. Second paragraph there, Chair Howell noted that new construction was leveling existing landscape. That is actually new owners that are doing that, not new construction. It's existing buildings where a new owner comes in and scorch earths the land. So I'd like to see that changed because it's not new construction. That's handled differently in the LDC. And we were talking specifically about glitches, and that's one that I think is a glitch. when a new owner comes in and decides to just chop everything down, scorch earth it, and that way they don't have to deal with any landscape. Any other issues?
Well, in the second paragraph, now, this is minor, but just above where Megan was talking about, point out that Gunther Mazer was the property owner, but the authorized representative was White Aluminum. What I pointed out was that it was the applicant. The applicant was in different cases, they'd both been named the applicant. And I think then was pointed out that one was the property owner and one was the authorized representative.
Change there in that.
Pardon?
You'd like to see that change too as well.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
I just would like the minutes to reflect, because you do go to council, reflect what was actually really talked about in these meetings.
Well, it doesn't make much sense to just point out to somebody, I mean, that, there's always a property owner and a
Applicant.
applicant, sometimes a representative. So that, how do we word that? Pointed out that both Gunther Mazer and the authorized representative were named as applicants, but one was a property owner and one was the authorized representative.
Wouldn't that paperwork need to be, that specific application fixed in order to go to town council? One, the applicant, and one, the property owner, is what
Yes.
you're saying. So that motion needs to be, or the application.
The property owner is Gunther Mazer. The applicant was White Aluminum. White Aluminum did the application process for Gunther Mazer.
But on the documents that supplement the application, the property owner was shown as the applicant also. That's what I was pointing out. Right. Yeah. I don't care how you word it.
I don't, the question is, do we fix the paperwork that goes, they would have to fix that on the paperwork that goes to town council.
Right.
I don't think it's that big of a deal, but the paperwork is filled
All
out.
right.
They're an authorized representative as the to be the applicant.
But it should read, Member Hughes pointed out that both the property owner and the representative, authorized representative, were designated as the applicant in some of the documents, but that Gunther Mazer was the property owner and the authorized representative was White Aluminum.
So noted. I'd like to make a motion, Jane, again.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now we'll open up the public hearing for Lynn Hall Park Dune Walkovers. The recommended approval of special exception 201-80029 to allow the construction of 4 dune walkovers in the EC district.
Good morning, Sarah Probst for Community Development, sorry, growth.
It is, it's the
Community
first meeting
development.
after everything.
I apologize. We came across a little bit of a conundrum this morning, and we've decided to separate the special exception from the variance. We're going to need to request an additional variance, so that will come to you at the next meeting, but we would like to discuss it today so that you're aware of the issues associated with it.
Okay,
So you'll only be making a motion on the special exception
and not the variance.
and not the variance, but we would like to have the variance discussion.
Okay.
The Lee County Board of County Commissioners has requested a special exception for the construction of 4 dune walkovers at Lynn Hall Park. Currently, the park features 4 at-grade walkovers, and the county would like to reconstruct the dunes and construct elevated walkovers in approximately the same locations. A special exception is required for construction of minor structures in the EC zoning district in accordance with section 3-6-366B2. Dune walkovers are considered minor structures.
Anyone here have any ex parte communications on this one? No? And we forgot the swearing in.
Yeah, that's, I'm trying to get a feel for how you all do it, but it would be appropriate to swear in all the witnesses who are going to testify on any of the matters before you this morning, and also, as you indicated, to disclose any ex parte communications you may have had with this particular item, and then identify them as we go through the agenda for each other one. So if there's anyone in the audience, in addition to staff, that are going to testify here this morning, they should stand and be sworn in at this time.
Anyone who is testifying today or speaking in front of us on matters, please stand and be sworn in.
Do you all swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? The witness has been sworn, and the advertising for the items have also been properly placed in the appropriate newspapers and at City Hall. So you're okay to go forward.
Anyone here from the county to speak?
Yes. I did want to ask if you wanted to discuss the special exception portion and then the variance, or if you wanted to do it all together and then just make a motion on the special exception.
How about we separate the two, just so that we're not confused up here on what we're discussing. So let's talk about special exception first, and then we can discuss the variance afterwards.
Okay.
Morning.
I am Mark Kincaid with Coastal Engineering, and also here is
Jesse Lavender, I'm the Director of Parks and Rec for Lee County.
and we put a brief presentation together for you this morning so that everybody is on the same page and understands what we're trying to do. To summarize what Sarah just said, there's 4 walkovers at Linnell Park. Right now, those walkovers,
Can you come back? Can we use both screens?
yeah, that would be good.
Nope.
Nope.
It's not
We're
working.
getting a negative
working.
from the
Okay. Dan,
room
come
back there.
sit down here in this empty chair down here.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
see, Lori?
I can see well enough, yes.
You might want to bring your whole package and stamp.
Okay, that's no problem. So if you can't see real well, what we're looking at is a aerial photograph of Linnell Park. And you can see all the little dots in the sand there are all the people that use it, and I'm sure that you're familiar with how busy of a park that is. So right now, the accesses that currently exist, you walk from the parking lot or from Times Square, and you walk on a level surface pretty much out into the sandy beach. That's not necessarily a good situation, but that's how it's been forever. The county would like to improve that situation by creating walkovers. And when we create those walkovers, they would also like to environmentally improve the dunes by recreating the dunes, by putting sand there, and also planting dune plants to better stabilize that. So as we progress through the design of these walkovers, as you know, whenever we do improvements for municipal projects, the ADA guidelines come into hand. So we need to accommodate handicap access for these. And when we do that, then we need to put switchbacks on the walkovers, which is going to make them longer than what they currently are. So I just wanted to give you an idea. Well, let me back up. There's a couple of bullet points here on this slide. So there's a lot of volume. There's a lot of traffic volume that goes through there. And then one other item if you look at the access that's closest to the pier, we call that access D. It's wider than the other accesses. And why is it wider? Because there's a lot of people going through there. There could be dozens of people trying to come in and out of there by the pier all at once. There's people with bicycles. There's people with carts that they're pulling out to the beach. There's ADA access through there. There's just a lot of volume. So that access now is currently about 10 feet wide. The other thing that happens through that access is the town and the county and state agencies use that access to bring in ATVs, safety vehicles, tractors, when we had the red tide to clean the fish out. That's the only access that side of the pier to get tractors and things through. So there's kind of a conflict there that's the widest access, that's where the most people are going through. And when we need to get equipment out, that's where the equipment has to go through. So that's not something that is good. In part of this design, we're looking to move where we bring the equipment on to the farthest north access. And that's one of the things that we're talking to you about is widening that access to the north so that we could bring equipment to access the beach. So I got a picture just to refresh everybody's memory of each of the accesses. And it's kind of far away for you guys to see up there, but you can get this is the access all the way to the north. So one view's from the parking lot looking toward the beach, and one's from the beach looking towards the parking lot. So that's the first one to the north. This is the next one, closer, just north of the bathroom structures. It's also a constant maintenance issue for the county. Because those walkways are flat and level with the sand, just the foot traffic, people walking back and forth, takes sand up there, the wind blows the sand up across those boardwalks and into the parking areas. So it's a daily process of keeping those boardwalks clean so that the sand isn't building up on them on a daily basis. This is the second one from the pier. Same view, one's looking towards the Gulf and one's looking away from the Gulf. And this last one is of the access right by the pier. And you can see how much wider that is. So what we're proposing to do is to tie these accesses in with the walkways that are existing in the parking areas. We want to provide a better access for the disabled and follow the ADA guidelines. We want to reduce the maintenance of these access ways. We want to enhance the dunes to make the dunes better, not only environmentally, but for the protection of the uplands there. If we raise the elevation of the dune, that's going to prevent, if we have surge, the waves from surging into the parking lot, which has happened. So here's a view of, and I apologize that it's small, but this is the overall view. And there are some dimensions in there, which is going to be really hard for you to see right now, but I've got the next slide, I've got them broken down into, this is the north half. So this is furthest away from the pier. And on that view, it should be in the package, and you should have hard copies of these drawings. Is that correct, Sarah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you could refer to those, you can see that the distances that we have, those all meet the requirements of the code. What we're asking for now is the variance for the special exemption, I'm sorry, for the width of the access A, which is to the left on this view, and for the width to increase.
No. The special exception is for the 4 dune walkovers. The variance would be for the width, according to my paperwork.
Agreeing, correct. Yeah, so just to point out, and since we're on this picture, you can see, I don't think you have the EC on, maybe you do, but the
Yes.
portion that is in the EC is what requires a special exception, and essentially it's, I don't know, maybe 10% of the entire pathway. It crosses over, maybe less of that. So it's really just a small, the end of these, where the dunes are. Interestingly enough, on this site, the dune itself is actually not, in portions of it's not in the EC, so a dune walkover is not in the EC. But having said that, really the special exception portion is only the portion that's in the EC. So it's it is a small portion of it. The rest of it, they have the proper zoning to do the walkways and do all that. It's just that end piece that's really the special exception. I just want to point that out because on scale, if somebody comes in with 100% of their walkover being in the EC, sometimes that's a different conversation than just the actual landing part to get over the dune.
This is because we have to extend them for the ability to do the switchbacks.
That's right. If we put steps there, we wouldn't need to extend them out that far. But we can't just put steps there because we need to follow the guidelines from the ADA. So that's going to cause the access ways to be lengthened and extend beyond that line.
If I were to say closer to what we have down at Newton Park with switchbacks.
Correct. So the requirement, yes, it extends the length of them because of the requirements to meet for public access, since it is obviously very popular in a public park for the whole community and the whole region, really.
Thank you, Jason.
Yes.
Questions for him from us?
I have a couple questions.
Concerns?
So I'm looking at these drawings with the walkovers, and they have like pilings underneath these. Are these structures going to be like the lifetime boards or something like that?
It's synthetic lumber,
I'm sorry?
synthetic lumber decking?
Okay,
Yes.
okay. And so this isn't going to be high enough for people to actually walk under or anything like that, right?
Oh, not at all.
Okay. You know, the problem, that's my walk. Every day we walk down to Times Square, and, you know, I know when I get there, I have sand on my flip-flops, and, you know, first thing I do is, you know, as I'm walking up the thing, I'm stomping it off and trying to clean it off. Is there a way to do something at the base of it so that we can kind of scrape things off, or so that it will sift it out as you walk up this ramp? Because then you get to Times Square, and then what do? I sit there and watch everybody go over to where the Christmas tree was and scrape their shoes right there, and so there's sand everywhere there.
Okay, so on several of these, there will be foot wash and showers up on the platform.
Okay. Just if there's some kind of, you know how like in Indiana, we have a little thing that you scrape your snow off your shoes before you go inside? You know, it's just kind of like a bar that you just can scrape your shoes there that would flow off the side. I think that would really help the amount of sand that comes into Times Square. And I don't know, just a side thing. But
Thinking about the golf, when you're
yeah,
done playing
the golf thing,
Good,
yeah.
cleaning cleats.
The other thing that I was, since the sidewalk's there, everything has to come forward for this height and this rest of this stuff. So I just want to understand is, as you come out, are you going just to extend straight out into the
The sidewalks won't change.
then, no, not the sidewalks, but the depth of the walkovers, they have to come out, and then are they going to turn right by the dunes, or are they going to continue to come straight out?
So this next page, it shows
Okay.
the construction of each one of them,
Okay, I don't see
if that'll help.
do I? What page?
Chairman, you know, on that, this is Dan. At Smuggler's Cove, we buy scrub brushes, turn them upside down and nail them in, and they use those, and it works very effectively to get the sand off your shoes.
Okay.
Find it? Okay.
I missed this page, it's stuck together. Okay.
If I may
So-
interject, I just want to point out that the shower, or not shower, but the wash-off area,
Washes.
and those things that they've mentioned are all landward of the EC district. They're in their park zoning district for the park.
And if I see right from the drawings, only 2 of them have it?
I believe 3 of them have it. Only the one to
three.
the northern one, Access A, does not.
Okay.
Okay.
And they are permitted to have those as part of the allowable uses within that zoning district.
Any other questions?
Sure, I just had a quick question about the reconstruction of the dune. Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, how much more sand, how much more height or an elevation will the dune have after it's reconstructed?
Sure, that's a good question. So, again, I'm sorry for they need a bigger TV or something here, don't they? So, in that drawing, do you have a copy of that drawing in your package?
I need a
Okay.
magnifying glass to see
So,
it.
so just so you know that those drawings are really 24 by 36, so that if you're reading them on an 8.5 by 11, it's not going to be readable. We have larger copies if anybody would like to look at them in more detail. If you wanted to walk up to the screen and look at that and to get more definition there, but I can walk over there and show you on those pictures. Would that be the best? Yeah. Okay.
Take your mic from there if you're going to speak. Go that way.
For an idea of height, I counted the steps to get you an idea from our drawings.
So the start at the top at A, you see the sand that we propose to. So at A, it's currently flat. The walkway's flat. We're going to build the dune up to match the profile to the left and the right of the existing. And we will plant new plants up to the dune, up to the access or the crossover, but not underneath the crossover. We don't think that the planting underneath the crossover will be successful. It doesn't really matter what the height is, just like was discussed a minute ago with the sand. People walk across there. There's hundreds and thousands of people that are going to walk across, and each one drops a little bit of sand. Sand's going to accumulate underneath of those walkovers. So it's just not very practical to say, oh, we're going to grow plantings underneath of those walkovers. You're just fighting a losing battle. So the dunes will be enhanced to where those existing pathways are. And then in front of the existing dune, we're planning to bring in more sand. We're going to bring in about 3 feet of sand in front in the middle of the area. And that would be in B and C, and it's over a much wider area. And we're going to plant new plants on top of that new sand that we bring in. So maybe it'll be better to look in the plan view. Well, let's go back.
The dunes be coming out
See-
further than they are now?
No, not really further than they are now, but they'll be higher than they are now. So
I mean, it's so packed down there, I can't imagine
No,
losing
we're
any
not.
more beach.
we don't want to take away any more beach, but we want to improve the dunes that there are now.
I agree.
If you walk out and you look at there's some grass or dune plantings that's very dense and looks good, that's closer to the sidewalks, closer to the parking lots. But as you get further towards the beach, the plants don't look, they're much more sparse and they're not as dense and not as healthy. That's what we're trying to enhance. So if you look at that picture and you see the green hatching, what we're calling the supplemental plantings, we're going to place sand on top of, there's some plants there now, but we're just saying we're going to replace those. They aren't that healthy. We're going to put sand over top of them, build that dune up there, and then we're going to replant it with healthy plants. So all that green area that you see on there, and they're still on the other slide,
So wouldn't you say the environmental impact would be minimal on this because we're actually going up and over top of the dunes and replanting too as well at the same time? Yeah.
There's not an impact. We're
that's-
reversing it the
we're
other
gonna
way.
actually
We're
improve it.
enhancing it.
Yes,
There's no
improve it.
impact, there's
Yeah.
enhancement. So can you read what I think by the time we're done, there's gonna be like 10 times more plants being planted than what would have been disturbed.
Did you say the height of the highest point is, I'm trying to read this, I think it's like 5 foot something?
The elevation on there, hang on 1 second, we'll say what page that's on. To give you an idea of the elevation, the access B, we're gonna move that. We're gonna move it from where it is now over to the restroom facilities, and we're gonna connect to the deck that is existing at the restroom facilities, and it's gonna be level, so you walk from the restroom, so there's a switchback already there at the restrooms, right?
Right.
So instead of creating another one,
Great.
taking up space, we're gonna use that one, and we're gonna connect that boardwalk right onto that deck, and it's gonna go straight out level from there. We're not elevating it higher than the restroom deck. Does that help?
High, that's high.
And then, since you're familiar with that park and you walk there every day, do you know the little special pond that they have there to the north of the restroom where there's a shower? It's not really supposed to be a
Yes,
pond, but that is going to be replaced with a shower that's going to be on top of the timber platform. So the water is going to go down into the dune and percolate into the sand out over that. So you won't be surrounded by that green colored sand.
What about the people who, have lotions and soaps and stuff like that they bring there? Is that going to be a problem for the environment? With the water just draining down, I mean, will that undermine the dunes as water coming straight down?
There is not any plants underneath of that,
Okay,
so
Okay.
we don't expect that to impact any more than it's impacting now.
Are concerned about the height of this?
well,
Specifically?
it's kind of surprising to me that it's going to be that high because, I mean, that seems like it's going to take an awful lot to get down to grade coming. Are they all going to be that high or that one's the highest?
They're all going to be that high.
That's a lot, that's pretty high. I mean, that,
Well,
yeah,
As-
I understand the
as
need
Sarah
to do
mentioned,
it.
as Sarah mentioned, you said you wanted to separate items, but Sarah brought up something else that we want to talk about next after we're finished with this conversation that talks about the height.
Carrying chairs and all that stuff through a maze going up and down will be interesting.
On that point, just to be clear, the reconstruction of the dune itself will increase height of the dune about, at the most, 3 feet. Is that your estimate?
We're not increasing the overall height of the dune. We're not making the dune higher. We're making the dune wider at that same height. When I said there are areas where we'll be putting in about 3 feet of sand, that gets it up to the elevation of the crest of the dune. We're just making the crest wider.
It's helpful.
We are making it higher over the flat accesses that are currently there. So from 0, we are bringing in the 3.
Any other questions for the county? Any questions for the town? Okay, would anybody like to make a motion on the variance? Oh, sorry, special exception. Oh, public comment. I apologize, Leon. Anyone in the public like to
Dan
speak?
might speak.
Again, first day back.
Good morning, LPA Chair, members, staff, Leon Moyer. Got a few questions and comments here. I think the width should be as wide as possible. If they're getting a special exception or variance for that later on, make it at least 10 feet, because two wheelchairs meeting side by side on a 6-foot wide area can barely clear. And 10 feet would be a lot more appropriate, I think, especially since they won't be able to go to one side and get off in the sand or anything. There'll be railings along the boardwalk there. I think one thing we didn't question was, will there be any mangroves growing out there in these dunes afterward and blocking the vision from the street or from the parking lots? We wouldn't want that necessarily. We've always been careful about the sight view, maintaining an open sight view to the beach and to the ocean. So you might want to respond to that issue. Extended switchbacks. Oh, your deed on packet page 13, I believe it's your first page you submitted, has a copy of a deed. It talks about a road right-of-way and the center line of the county road. And I believe that's the county road that used to run through the Times Square. You're using that as a measurement. It's a continuation of Old San Carlos Street. Has that ever been lawfully vacated and given back to the town, or is that still county property in Times Square? It appears as to what your documents submitted today, that it's still county property and you're still using it definitely for a measurement point to determine these things. After all, that one access, the first access there, does come right off of Times Square, and that's being measured from the old road, so that may all still be county property. In other words, where is the boundary for Lynn Hall Park, on the south side or east side? Building up to present height. If you remember looking underneath the boardwalk there at the restrooms, it's enough clearance for people to sit down under there, about 4 feet. You're creating a public nuisance there by running a boardwalk out if it's up that high, because it's going to be very tempting for homeless people to spend a night underneath there. So if you want to police that, fine, but that's creating something that doesn't now exist. You're intending to make it look better and everything, but I'm kind of worried we might be losing a little bit of beach there, because some people probably are presently laying down with their blankets in the area that has sparse plantings, and that's the area you want to enhance. So if you enhance it, they will no longer be able to lay their blankets in there. Maybe that's why the grass isn't growing there right now, you know. So you are kind of taking away a little beach access, perhaps, a beach sand area. And we won't know till you get done how much is lost. I guess those were my major points there, and thank you for addressing those issues.
Moyer. Any other public comment? All right, we'll close public comment.
I would like to ask, so as you come over the dune that is existing, that dune will be enhanced, and you said widened, but not widened outside of where the dune area is now, so that we're losing beach, correct?
That is correct.
And as the thing comes over, it will turn at the edge of the dune to run along that line, right? Okay.
And if I understand right, we're adding sand underneath this
So that
to
there's
not have the
space.
4-foot height underneath in temptation to sit, if I understood these plans right.
It really didn't have anything to do with having people go underneath there or not. It's the right thing to do for the dune system. If we have a breach in the dune system and water goes through it, the water's going to come back out, and it's just going to be an erosion issue. So the reason that we want to reestablish that dune is for the protection of the dune system.
Thank you. Anyone else? Like to make a motion on the special exception?
I'll make a motion to approve the special exception 20180029 to allow construction of 4 dune walkovers in the EC zoning district for walkovers wider than 6 foot. Oh, wait, so I recommend approval for oh, no, I'm not going to do the variance, right? Okay, never
We're
mind.
not doing the variance, just a
So
special
I
exception.
don't say 6 feet in
Nope.
there? Okay, so let me redo that. I recommend approval for special exception 20180029 to allow construction of 4 dune walkovers in the EZ zone district, period.
Second.
Attorney?
Madam Chair, if I may ask, that if the movement will add that as part of the motion, that the criteria for the special exception, that based upon the evidence testimony presented here this morning, that you're finding that the criteria in the code and in the comprehensive plan for the special exception are being met.
Sure, I will amend. I will amend my motion to say that through the analysis that the findings and conditions have been met, and okay, we don't go over the special exception. And
The criteria is on page 20 of your packet.
Just make reference to the, you can make it incorporate by reference to criteria set forth on page 20.
okay. That the special exception considerations have been met on page 20.
Thank you.
Seconded as amended.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Special exception passes. Would we like to spend a few minutes now talking about the variance, or after the next public hearing?
It would be my preference to do it now.
Okay.
So originally, they had been requesting a variance for having dune walkovers wider than 6 feet. That's part of the criteria requirements that we have in our code. In addition to that, it also appears that they need to have a variance for having it less than 2 feet over the height of the dune and dune vegetation, because at some point it's approximately 6 inches over it. So rather than having one variance go now and then another variance go next week or next meeting, we would prefer to have both of those variances go together. But we would like our experts to explain, why those requests were made and why the variances are appropriate.
It's all yours, guys.
Thank you. So, as we were discussing before, and was mentioned about the heights of the walkovers now, the code says that we need to be 2 feet above the existing dune. I believe, it doesn't say this in there, but I believe that is for the plantings underneath, which I've already talked about. I don't think that that's going to be successful. And this is my opinion, I just don't think that even if you had a deck that was 2 feet higher than the dune, that you're going to have flourishing plants underneath of them. So the other thing is, the higher you go with your crossover, the more distance that you'll need to get back down, because the ADA requires that we not exceed a 12-to-1 ramp. So for every foot that we go up, you're going to have to go 12 feet further. So in our design, and the other thing that we talked about was the existing elevation of the restroom deck. So if we had to go 2 feet above that, we would have to ramp up from the restroom deck and then go out and then go down. So with all those things combined, plus the fact that in permitting through the state with DEP and FWC, they had issues with what we have presented already being too much. Specifically, the concerns were about turtle nesting, and if we went to the state with a modification to say, oh, we need to go up 2 feet more or even a foot more and extend those walkovers, I don't think the state would agree with that. So we're going to ask for this variance to put these boardwalks at the elevation that we're showing in these construction plans, because it makes sense, because it's good for the environment, it's good for the project, it's good for the dunes. So that's where we're headed.
One other thing
Question
I'd like
on
to add, we've already entered, the Board of County Commissioners has already entered into an agreement with FWC for the sea turtles nesting and this project in order to get our permits. So that's already been executed.
This is for the town, though. We just approved a special exception for the right to build it as as it is already presented to us. So haven't we already approved the height?
No, you've approved you've essentially approved the use in the EC district.
Okay.
So the technical details so they could come back and say, okay, we can meet the 2 feet, we can go through your design criteria as, through a development order, and staff would review that, and it wouldn't go to a public hearing, and they either meet it or they don't. This is before that, to have to avoid that, so they want to do the variance to those two technical issues, which is width and then the height over the dune. And he's correct, because our code, for whatever reason, it was written as 2 feet above the dune or the vegetation, essentially. So they would, to get plants under there, they would have to do the plants and then be 2 feet above the height of those plants, which, as you've already been told, and you've, Ms. Plummer mentioned, that would change the point of entry, it would change the elevation of the boardwalk, it would substantially make a difference coming back from the park.
Yeah, I'm kind of in well, and this is just a point of disagreement, because we have said that we are agreeing for it to go into EC as it's been presented to us, which would be at such height, wouldn't it?
So the use of the boardwalk, dune walkover portion as it completes is what you've approved.
Variance will be
I
to
get
not
it.
have to have the,
I think we're splitting hairs, but I'm also saying that you guys asked us for a special exception with plans, and we approved the special exception based off of these plans. So I mean, it's kind of,
doesn't have plans in it.
So,
though.
so again, just that is information that you have. Those technical engineering plans are not essentially what you approved. I would say more the location map and the description of what is going in is what you approve. The structural review hasn't officially been done on those plans either, so there could be a bolt change, there could be lots of things that get changed because of that. But that's not the request. And then again, a portion of it, and I don't want to speak, but I think actually the dune part is not in the EC, right, for most of it.
That's correct. Most of the dune is not in the EC, but also because you didn't reference the plans, and you didn't, I think that you are free and clear. It's just the use in the EC that you've approved.
I have another question about, we're going to go higher with the dunes. Is there going to be anything that will be put on the seaward side of the sidewalks existing in Lynn Hall that will stop the breeze and we have some really great winds that come, and that sand just flies. And so that 3 foot extra can just end up in the parking lot because it's going to go straight out. Is there going to be any kind of wall or anything that will help hold that sand from just blowing over? Or just 2 weeks ago, we had water up in Times Square because of the winds, and it was only winds. We really didn't even have a storm.
I think that's the reasoning for the additional plantings that they're proposing. The only place the plantings are not proposed is directly underneath the board or the walkovers. So theoretically, those
We'll
plants will.
hold that there, you think?
Yeah, that's what should happen.
Do we have a plan B if it doesn't?
We have a tractor and we'll put it back.
Okay, like we've always done, yes.
hence
more sand.
Hence the water, so you can get the tractor in there.
Good job.
All right. Any other questions of them? Will we be seeing you again for the variance?
Just a quick question, since the Parks Director's here. Could you give us an estimated cost of this proposal?
Construction alone is $438,000. I think the total ask from the TDT Beach and Shoreline funding through the TDC Council and the commissioners was about $490, somewhere around there. Yeah.
When will it start?
It's going to start after sea turtle season. November of 19 is when we'd like to start.
Before Christmas?
It would be completed as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
I can't make any guarantees, contractors.
Any other questions of them?
Will be done before the road's done?
Yes, it will.
Maybe we could put
Can we
Roger's
just not talk
$500
about
a
that
day
road that's
fine.
now really
right.
a bone of my contention?
Again, on parks, not DOT.
Yeah.
So we have the two variances that will run together just so that it's consistent with the width that you've already had kind of described to you as far as the purpose of those, and then the height over the dune.
Madam Chair, what I would recommend for purposes of creating the record, so you can expedite, you don't have to go through the whole process again unless you so chooses, to continue this particular item to date and time certain to the next meeting, so you can carry over what you've already heard and take action on the item based upon what you've heard here today.
You're okay doing that even though we're adding to it too as well?
I believe, that yes. I mean, technically, the argument can be made that you should open up the public hearing again for that particular, the height issue. But you've already heard it, and it's up to you all whether or not you ask the county, the applicant, to restate on the record the reasons for the variance requests.
But wouldn't we still have to do a public hearing because we still have to have public comment, all the other
Yeah, I would.
due process?
Yes, but again, I'm just,
Okay.
in order to be able
Okay, so
to
we don't have to
consider
restate
what you've already heard in addition to what you would hear at the next meeting.
So they would
I so
continue.
move.
Okay.
You so move? Anyone second?
And that is, I'm sorry,
To
February
move
12th.
date certain to February 12th?
Yes.
So we are moving recommended the variance 201-80030 to be heard, date certain February 12th.
Starting at 9 a.m. or
9
as soon as
a.m.
thereafter.
And we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved.
Okay.
Thank you. Next, we'll be opening up public hearing for the LDC text amendment for engineering standards and construction detail. Land Development Code text amendment for engineering standards, construction details to incorporate by reference the engineering standards, construction details, and allow for administrative updates and publication as necessary. This is in reference to that packet technical drawings you gave us too as well.
Yes, Jason Green, Community Development. This is what we discussed when I provided you that packet of construction standards and engineering standards and construction details. Essentially is moving, some of that was in text in the code. What most communities are doing at this time are moving that sort of technical manual out of their land development code to use it, because those details change, the standards behind them change on a regular basis. DOT kind of drives the boat on some of those standards. Some of them are also local, but it allows the jurisdiction, the town, to update those without having to go through an entire land development code redraft, and it just makes it easier to update those. I think what we're going to end up doing is probably by adopting that manual by resolution at the town council, and then it'll be modified by resolution. But this will have to be an ordinance in front of the town council to change the text to reference that manual and incorporate that manual by reference. So what we've done is cleaned up some language to reference the manual, or the engineering standards and construction details, and also struck a lot of the language in table 10.2, which essentially that language is in detail form in the manual. So, and some of those actually are outdated, so they've been updated as part of that construction standards and details. And I don't know if there's specifics that you want to go, but such as there's old references to a DOT manual, there's asphalt references that are outdated, and those have all been updated as part of what you saw in that manual, basically. So this is the formal way of adopting it by reference in the land development code. It's just all the standards and regulations won't be shoved into the land development code. Because you could imagine what a difference it would make to the land development code to bring all those details into.
Was that 25 pages of technical drawings that we
At
looked
least.
at?
I think it might have been 50.
Yeah.
So.
So essentially, if I understand this right, we are taking those technical drawings, making a separate document by resolution, and then right now we are changing the LDC to refer to that.
Correct.
Doesn't that need to come first? Making that technical document.
No, because
official.
the council can, no, because it's not necessarily it's not a land development code thing. It's a technical standard of how thick the asphalt has to be, or what the amount of base is under a roadway. Our goal was to just send it to the council for a resolution.
But aren't we referencing something that's not official yet?
Right, so this will go to the council as a text amendment by ordinance. It have to have 2 public hearings, and we'll do the resolution for the manual at the same time. So they'll be adopted together, let me put it that way.
So when we talked about that manual, were any changes that we discussed changed, or it's the same manual as is that we saw.
I think there was one or two details that got updated. It's essentially a tech, yes, so, and that'll be done regularly as, every year essentially, we should be updating that manual. As a DOT, again, some of it's driven by DOT, so as their standards change, you want to reflect that in the manual. We'll have to do that you do the same thing with utility standards in details, is you try to do it every year if possible. Unfortunately, a lot of communities don't.
What I'm concerned about is we're referencing a manual that doesn't even, by resolution, doesn't even exist yet.
Well,
We've
because-
seen it,
Sure.
but it doesn't officially exist yet.
They
And
will
yet
ex-
we're changing our LDC to reference something that has not been adopted by resolution yet.
Because they will exist at the same time.
They will merge.
I'm real concerned about not having that manual done. If you see what I'm,
Right, so
you're asking us to reference something that Mr. Safford just asked has been changed, and it's changed, and we don't see it.
And frankly, you won't see it on a regular basis. It's
Well, I
not
get that, but-
right, so I was not thinking that you wanted to have technical review or input on the rest of that manual. We got the feedback, but if there's,
Hear you, but I guess my bigger concern here is that you're asking us to change the code to a manual that we saw 2 months ago, have not had the chance to review again, whether we choose to or not, and then we're going to change it without ever it being officially adopted, but yet our code is being changed, is going to resolution by our recommendation.
so, okay, I understand I think there's two parts there, right? So it's,
I mean, I'm not trying to make this more difficult.
so
I'm
nothing's
not trying to
changing
make
today.
it more difficult
Right.
either, but
So nothing changes today. This recommendation of a text change to reference a manual that will be I don't know if it'll be first or second, but it will be adopted by resolution by the council.
the council will have the manual.
They have to adopt by resolution is the way that we've talked about, or ordinance. I mean, we could do it either way, but generally resolution to adopt that construction standards and details. And at the same meeting, hopefully, they'll do the text change to the code to reference it. This goes first because it's
I
your
would think-
recommendation.
But when the
of text
manual
code.
go first is what I'm saying. Wouldn't the manual go first, and then we change the LDC to match this manual that's been adopted, that we now are changing the code to reference a manual?
We were just going to do it at the same time because
But,
if you
and,
do.
and the
if
other
you-
thing too is, did you put some other pictures in there that we didn't know about? Is it bigger now?
No, generally, no. The only thing that would be tweaked is wording or a reference. I think there's a question about I think Leon asked a question about the mailboxes, which
Yeah.
we did not change that. But again, that's a guide that can be changed through engineering plans. If somebody comes in with a mailbox to do that, we don't generally review those. But if they come in with a development to put the mailboxes in and it needs to be adjusted based on engineering practices, then they can do that. So I'm just,
Madam Chair, I understand, and the board, I understand your concern and your question. It really is the chicken before the egg, and the solution that we're proposing is that they be given birth at the same time. That at the same time that the city council is adopting the ordinance on second reading, they will be adopting and they will have the opportunity to see and approve the manual at the same time. They can always direct staff to modify that manual, and in fact, that's the reason why moving forward, the proposal is to do it by resolution, so it's easier to change. It won't have to go through that public hearing process and advertising every time there's a change. And that's important because in some instances, not all the time, when you're seeking state funds, particularly for road projects and things of that nature, FDOT says you have to use our standards if we're going to give you state money. And that's part of the reason why we're trying to adopt the manual in substantially the form that FDOT maintains. So if there are modifications, they can be processed fairly quickly via resolution as opposed to ordinance. But to your question and your concern, the council will have the opportunity to take a look and review the resolution before it gets approved.
Did we do that under public hearing or administrative agenda?
it was an administrative agenda.
Does it need to be under public hearing if it's going, or I guess the bigger question is, it's not going to council with our that it was recommended or any resolution from us. Just a straight manual, this is the engineering standards.
But I intend to give them the meeting minutes and the feedback that you provided, and that, obviously, and any other kind of input that we get from, I've been communicating with other engineering professionals in the community that we worked with, provided them with some copies, trying to get some of their feedback as they go through the permitting process to see how it works. So we've been trying to gather that public information as we go. But no, to the point is, I think the point of this process is to eliminate the higher standard of oversight on a technical specifications by getting it out of the land development code. That's kind of the point, is so that it's a manual that
Adam,
the engineering professionals can kind of
Chairman.
update as needed.
I would like someone to articulate exactly what they're asking us to do today, so we know exactly what we're voting on here.
What they're asking us to do is change the text in the LDC to reference the manual, the engineering standards and construction details that we saw a few months ago, that 50 pages of technical drawings,
Right.
and to reference that in the LDC now.
Right, so on
Because
page
they're
eight-
going to adopt that booklet as a manual for standards. Now they need us to change the LDC to reference it.
right, so on page 87 of your packet, that is the start of the strike-through underline of the land development code text that we're asking for your recommendation of approval to amend this code to reflect these changes, which essentially reference the manual. And then the manual, again, being birthed at the same time, will be done by separate resolution, so that they don't have to be adopted into the land development code.
We're not putting our imprimatur on any details of the manual itself.
You've provided feedback, and you've reviewed and provided some feedback, and we've
Right.
continued to try to gather as much expertise, feedback as possible on that. And then a final version, I say final, will go to the council.
We did not do it by approval. We only had an administrative discussion on it, so there was
Yes,
no
I
resolution.
understand that, but
So if I could, maybe I can walk you through essentially what changes in the, what the difference is this section, specifically table 10.10-2, everything that you see struck out has to do essentially with road design. And so there are engineering standards and details in that manual that dictate that, and there's slight differences, mostly in the subbase and that sort of thing, and the type of asphalt or the thickness of asphalt. But essentially, we put into pictures what was in text. The rest of that table we've left because it does not specifically, is not specifically referenced in the details, and could depend on the type of street as is referenced in 10-296D, and then obviously there's those categories that you see. But I left those portions in there because they're not referenced in the details. And then the rest of it is essentially cleanup of references to Lee County Community Development. If you go to page 91, for example, you've got some changes in there related to, again, the cleanup to Fort Myers Beach instead of Lee County. You also have number 4 there that's entirely stricken because, again, that's the pictures that are in the manual of how we do the driveways. There are a lot more that were added, obviously, details to help us, because there's things that were missing in here, and so you had 2 options. Either you edit the code to add in what kind of radius you're going to have, what kind of thickness of concrete for your driveways, or whatever the requirement might be, or you create that manual that we created. And so we thought the pictures were worth more than the words. So that's essentially what the draft is. So this has to be done by ordinance to the council through 2 public hearings as an amendment to the land development code.
I mean, it's clear that we're striking out anything that's referenced in that manual that we had of technical drawings. The
And
changes
if I may
here.
point out, they were different. I mean, that's the biggest part, is getting them updated to more modern standards, since these were about 20 years old.
Anyone have any more questions from them, for them?
I don't want to push you into anything. It's entirely up to you. I wasn't expecting you to want to have the manual,
It's
so
not
that's
as-
my fault for that. I apologize.
Madam Chair, we can always forward this board's comments to the city council when the item moves forward. If that's your concern, that you want them to be aware of what your concerns were, we can share that information.
Scott Safford, I just want it to be duly noted that we did not see the manual when we passed this along. If we do so pass it, just so that they know that we just glanced at it. I mean, not glanced at it, but we looked at it in a previous hearing, and we haven't seen any updates since. So I want to make sure that when they approve this, that they go through it with a fine-tooth comb like we did.
You don't want someone to come back and say, why did you approve or recommend approval of that? And I get that.
Yeah, so why did you approve something you didn't see?
Right.
So that's
Is
So,
there
my
some
only
sort of
point.
urgent issue that this has to be done at this meeting here?
No, you can continue to the next if you want. I mean, obviously,
I'd feel
we
more
can't
com-
utilize the standards until we get this through, but yes, you can continue it.
I mean, I think that's where you're getting these looks from, is I think we all would rather see that, make sure that we are all in agreement. You know, again, it was 2 months ago when we saw those, that, you know, there's just, I understand what you're trying to do, and I understand, but I think that, you know, as our responsibility should be to review that too one more time before we go make any changes.
And I just, for the public's benefit, and I don't want to be disrespectful, I just want to caution your expectations of how much control you have over the manual, because again, a lot of that, we have to have engineering reasons why. So that's why we generally default to DOT, because some group of people created a standard, and so your easiest way to avoid lawsuits.
Megan,
But I
excuse
agree,
me.
that's fine.
I'm okay saying if we're going to approve this, we approve it, but we did not see it. So I don't want someone to come back and say, how did you approve something you didn't?
And that's where
So-
I'm more concerned about, is that we haven't seen this, and we will get that comment. How did you pass something and recommended something you haven't seen or reviewed? I don't
Fair
think that
enough.
we're going to make changes to it, but it would be nice to know what we're
That's fair enough.
attaching our name to, I guess, is the bigger piece.
My only problem, Jane Plummer for the record, is that I just want to make sure that this document, that'll be easier to change, because it's a document instead of in the standards, I mean, in the LDC, is not something that we won't see the changes because they can be administratively done. And that's what that's my only concern, is that I don't want to approve something that I'm taking LPA out of the loop of changes in the future.
If I may address that, part of the issue, part of the reason why we're having this discussion is that when the city when the town incorporated, you know, it adopted and it followed for some time the Lee County Code. And the jurisdictions, if you were to do a survey of cities and counties throughout the state, about half of the counties and cities have these type of technical standards in a separate chapter. Roads and bridges, streets and sidewalks, whatever they call it, as a standalone chapter that is not within the Land Development Code, because from the standpoint of what state law defined as a land development regulation, it doesn't affect the development of land.
Because we don't have any say over it. Right.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we're, you know, and there's, again, that aspect of that every 2-3 years, or maybe even more on a more regular basis, FDOT updates that manual, sends it out to everyone, and most governments either adopt a version of it or they adopt it verbatim, they re-adopt it, and thus the concept of doing it by resolution. Here, by inheriting the Land Development Code and the structure, the format, it stayed in the Land Development Code, and so we're trying to split the baby somewhat down the middle by having you all review the change to the Land Development Code that will allow us to adopt the manual by resolution, but because it's a technical item, and I don't mean this in a negative way, not necessarily bother you all every time it needs to be updated.
Right.
With that said, I understand your concern. Continue the item, and we'll bring the manual back to you at the next meeting.
I just think it would be in our best interest to just have a final look at it and say, you know, that there wasn't any other little things added that make it easier for other things to be done without going through the LPA and the town council. That's, I mean, I understand, you know, building standards are building standards, and that's all in there, but there's these other 3 lines that got put in at the bottom, you know, that kind of thing. I just want to make sure.
And I think the benefit long-term is if something comes up where there's developers that have an issue with something, we can readily change it to reflect those concerns. Or if something in the field is not working the way, paper space is supposed to, we can change those. And again, there are guidelines, so
Right,
an engineer with a reason to do something different can justify that.
okay.
So, just as background, sorry.
This is Dan. Refresh my recollection, the engineering standards and construction detail, that manual was prepared by whom?
Between the town and Weiler Engineering.
And whom?
Weiler Engineering.
But that was specifically engineered for our town?
There's portions of it that take into consideration parts that were in here. For example, the driveway section updates, but tries to, I guess, overall reflect the requirements that were in here in text. So if you go to page 91, section 4, subsection 4 was struck. It's pictorially, essentially, in some notes depicting similar conditions. So it didn't change how you do a driveway. It just created a detail for most of that. And part of that is to make it easier for people to get permitting for driveways, frankly. But yes, some of it reflects local, but a lot of it also reflects and stands by a DOT standard.
My question is in my experience in Illinois, the state statute in Illinois required that if you incorporate technical specifications by reference, it had to be part of a code, a national code, approved national code and so forth. And is that a problem, Mr. Attorney, in terms of incorporating something by reference? Not that I don't have a problem with what we're doing here. I'm looking at the next step at the town council level where they're incorporating by reference a manual that is not a generally accepted manual, but it's something that was drafted specifically for our town. And it's not part of the ordinance, it's by reference, so it can be amended by resolution from time to time.
It's perfectly okay.
It is?
It can, yes.
It wouldn't be in Illinois, we couldn't do that.
No, and that, there used to be something similar to that as it related to the building code until ultimately the state of Florida decided that it wasn't going to be part of the ICSC or the umbrella organization that creates a lot of these codes.
Right.
And now, Florida has its own Florida building code.
Yeah, we had BOCA.
Yeah. So and so it's not, it's okay. It's perfectly legal for the town to go ahead and do so. There isn't a requirement under state law that it meets certain standards. And I said before, in many respects, particularly when local governments are trying to obtain state funding for projects that impact some of these standards, FDOT will say, well, you have to use our standards. And so by having that incorporated, it creates less of a conflict in applying for and obtaining those state grant funds.
I guess the bigger question is, what do we want to do here as a whole? I mean, does somebody, before I get to public comment, just kind of get an idea of, are we wanting to push forward this? Are we wanting to move this off? Do we want to see this document that we're about to change the LDC code to reference?
I'd prefer to have the document, just to pass it on. We can look at it and give it back to them so they don't have to reproduce it for the town council, but I think the document should be a part with it.
I'm in agreement with her. I'd just like to see it. Again, it was 2 months ago. I probably, of the 50 pages, remember 25 of them, to be quite frank with you. And so here I'm now trying to change we're talking about changing our LDC on something I only remember about half of, because it was a large technical document with a lot that covered a broad range of standards.
I'm all for this, and I was all for the document, and I know it's going to help your permitting process. And at the end of the day, we want the permitting process streamlined. Believe me, we all know that.
Yes, we
but
do.
I just want to delay it a month just so we can put it together.
Sure. That's fine.
feel like if the document were here, we would all be ready to move forward.
And that's on me. I did not know if you want to go through, I didn't want to reprint all that for you again and then have you say, why did we get all this?
I hate that.
Frankly,
I hate
so
to do that, and that's why
That's
I'm
fine.
saying that we would give it back to you, because it is a huge document to give to the town council, so that you only have to
not a
print
problem.
out a
Give
few
it
more.
back. I'm fine with that, too.
We'll take
No,
care of it.
less.
So we're all in kind of, we would like to see this document before we go change it in our LDC to reference it.
Do you want it individually, or do you want it in your packet as the next meeting?
In our packet's fine.
Okay. Can we take public comment on it just for?
That's what I was going to,
Well, could we just have any changes from the last? I mean, if,
That's what I was asking. I mean, what
Huh?
we, that's, I think we need the document. I mean, there might have been some changes, there might have been some additions. We don't know.
I know it covers streets, it covers sidewalks, it covers
it's-
mailboxes and swales. What else is, I don't remember what else is in there. I mean,
I remember
Yes.
it. I'm sorry.
it's
okay.
2 months ago.
I understand.
Look, I don't want to delay things, but I want to do it right.
Well, I will tell you, it has not grown. If that's your concern. It has not grown anything.
I think that's all good, because the process is tough.
I mean, I
Jim,
hate to delay
Jim,
something, but, yeah.
I have a question for Jim. Did you guys see the document? Or was that before you guys were here?
he was here.
Yeah, we
Yeah, you
saw-
were here. That was your
we
first
saw the
meeting.
document.
Okay.
So it would have been November.
That's how we welcomed him, so.
Yes. Here,
That's right, okay.
read this for interesting reading.
Okay. How about I take some public comment on this? Anyone? I think it is too. The chair would like to request the air conditioning to be turned down.
Up,
Freezing up here.
Turned up.
Up, heat
Yeah.
up, air
I'm
conditioning
about,
down.
I forgot my jacket. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leon Moyer for the record. And I want to thank you all for doing a very thorough job of considering the issue here and being cautious and erring on the cautious side. I think that's very appropriate. Your attorney has done an excellent job of talking about splitting the baby, and that does pretty much explain, I think, what's happening here. I'd like to direct your attention back to the first, perhaps, packet page there, 86, I believe, and, no, 87. Yeah, section 10-296, under paragraph A. The first highlighted section in that paragraph says, "The Fort Myers Beach and engineering standards and construction details shall be adopted and amended by resolution." Now, I question that. Why aren't they doing ordinance? Because there won't be any public comment if they do it by resolution. Council just gets something, and even put it on the consent agenda and just pass it. Now, that does expedite matters, but I'm not sure it's the best, and maybe you have a recommendation on that. You could still recommend it be done by ordinance, so that there'd be time for public comment to any changes made in the future. And then if you go down to the next page, we deal with the issue of changes being made by the strikeouts. Actually, it's the bottom of the same page. The categories, we shouldn't ignore that section in the very left-hand column of Table 10-2. Category A includes streets and alleys and commercial developments outside of the other two categories. Category 2 is residential developments denser than 4 dwelling units per acre. And Category 3 is the same, only with 4 or fewer dwelling units per acre. Now, when you get into the sections like swales and piping materials, they crossed out everything there. They're going to do away with that and try to adopt the national standard. And I don't think that's necessarily good. The reason you had Weiler and Associates do the original composition here was because this island is different in structure than mainland Florida. So maybe you want to consider all those issues and keep some of these curb and gutter regulations or swale requirements. And on the next page, you notice they kept A, but they crossed out B and C. And I don't know why they're doing that, because they actually crossed out the whole subgrade section there. And pavement base, for instance. They didn't cross out the letter A, but they crossed out the whole paragraph. So maybe that pretty much does get rid of everything there. But it's very important to keep local control. That's the whole purpose of town government. And you're kind of going into the big city mecca area here with adopting this engineering standard. Let me see if I had any other issues here. I believe that was about everything. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Moyer, close public comment. So I think at this point, we want to push it off. We want to date certain it next month.
Sure. And just for reference, those As are struck out. It's just you can't see the strike because it's an
Oh,
A.
It's an A. Okay, I see that now.
Generally, rule of thumb, As are hard to see on the strikeout.
Got it.
And yes, it has a line, it does have a line.
And it's
through-
purple.
And it's purple.
Okay. Anyone would like to make the motion for date certain next month? Or I will.
I'd like to make a motion to move the request to the Land Development Code okay, wait a minute, what do I want to say? I'd like to move this package for the Land Development Code, engineering standards and construction detail to be incorporated into a reference standard and construction detail to be represented on a date certain with the standards intact so that we can approve it all together.
If you're going to say a date certain, you've set the date.
Set the date, February 12th, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to take a 5-minute recess.
Go see if we have a jacket in the car.
How about 10 minutes? We'll meet back in here at 10:30. Yes, I'm cold. All right,
Oh, that's
it
probably-
is
is it a
10:31.
305?
Yeah.
Kind of got our sidebars all done.
But
So-
you could,
That's a good point.
No, but there was
You
no
could call-
Miami, it just said MIA. I thought,
I'm missing in action.
seen that one before.
Am I
Alright.
missing in
put in
action
the Fort
number?
Myers address, the Fort Myers number, call the Fort Myers ask for me. and
No, it's fine, I didn't recognize the address.
All right.
I don't think he's
Still-
picking up on the time.
You know,
You travel all the time, you're missing an action number.
It is 10:32. I'd like to call the meeting back in order. I believe we've got the heat turned back up in here.
No, we got
It's
the
coming.
air warmer.
Heat, just turn off the air.
Yeah, that's an idea.
And next on our agenda is, we'll open the administrative agenda of this meeting. The LDC glitch issue C, building height.
Very,
Prevent,
very exciting.
oh,
Jason Green,
all
Community
stuff that needs
Development,
to be addressed.
hopefully assisted by Sarah if I forget some stuff. Sarah and, well, us and consultant and Sarah have been working on some of these, as you know. So item C was building heights. And we tried to simplify it, I guess, and give you three general ways to look at it. I won't read through all of the stuff, but essentially our current code is, what is it, 25 to 40 feet above base flood, depending on the zoning district, which is essentially 2 or 3 stories. And as we know, the scale, I think, is what, not necessarily the height. We've been trying to control height through architectural appurtenances have been added. Roof lines have gotten bigger, but also the buildings themselves have gotten bigger through maximizing space. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and the three options that we gave, and obviously they're from other communities, so you would have the opportunity to make any changes or revisions that fit the needs of the island, but these were just some ideas for you to ponder. That not all communities measure building height in the same way. We measure to the eave, whereas a lot of them measure to the mean height of the roof. Others, it's based on the type of roof. So I provided you with City of Fort Myers that measures based on the type of roof. And then massing is another option, and that's basically as the building gets higher, you know, the building has to come in from the sides, and that could be like a second story has to be set in a few feet, or it could be angled. That's a massing option. And then another option that several communities use, and I did have a typo in here. I used Marco Island and Naples, but I accidentally wrote in Surfside because I was also looking at their code. They have setbacks, like base setbacks based on the height of the building. So for buildings over a certain height, you have to increase your setback. And that's so that you're not overshadowing your neighbors and you're not cutting into the view too much, creating a giant box.
And I think that's what our overall, probably this is the number one thing we hear about, or at least I'm hearing about, are those big houses and the massive footprint, lack of sun, all that we're hearing from our residents here on the island.
And you have a couple different things working for and against each other, I guess, which is the more restrictions or regulations on the height, the limiting factor on architectural features, right? So you get maybe flat roofs, you get maybe as a result of that. So there's some unintended consequences. But at the same time, Sarah and I have regularly dealt with bigger houses, for example, that have massive roofs. And it's partially because of the design, and sometimes there's an attempt to really kind of fit in maybe an extra story. So we try to catch that, but also partly just because the size of the building, the roof becomes, or the attic, if you want to call it that, becomes massive. And so the height inside the attic, the spanning, all of that becomes quite substantial, which it has to be able to meet the structural requirements. So that's what we're dealing with. And that's part of that story, right? That's part of the adding to the height is this overwhelming size of some of these roofs, which can make up an extra, I don't know, 15, 20 feet in some cases. But again, some of that is self-inflicted as a means to add architectural features, which sometimes is really an architectural feature and sometimes is a way to extend the roof line to create more habitable space. So it's these issues are kind of battling against each other.
But also, as Jason pointed out, some of these structures are just very large houses. And, you know, as you get, if you're just going straight up and creating a box, that box has to have a top. And that's going to create a lot of additional space. And there isn't a lot that we can do about that on the review side, but it is going to create very massive looking structures for residents.
So as you've done your research, is there, of these options that we have here, is there one that you see reoccurring? I know you provided 3 examples, but if you were looking at 10 different cities similar to ours, is there one that kind of keeps popping up?
I've actually never worked with or in a community that measures roof height from the eave, because you do end up with very massive roofs because of that. I've always worked with communities that do measurements in a similar fashion to City of Fort Myers, which is flat roofs from the top of the flat roof. The mansard roofs you don't run into as much, but from the mean height between the eave and the ridge, and then for a typical A-frame style roof would be from the midpoint also. I find that that resolves a lot of issues, because then you don't have massive structures in the roof, because it counts towards the height of the structure. And typically the designer is going to want to maximize the use of the space that's livable.
So by making what you were saying, the idea then would be that the roof, right now, the way the living space is we measured to the eave. Then he put these massive roofs on top of that, but we're still only measuring to this. If we make this change that it's to, let's just say, the median height of a specific roof, then that actually will draw these buildings down some. It doesn't necessarily limit the living space, but it does limit the massive roofs that we're seeing.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think as part of this process, we'd have to consider that. I mean, you don't want to just do that change and then say you've just lost 5 feet or 7 feet worth of height in general of living space, right? Because everything has to shrink. So I think what we could do is take the concept and work with some people in the community. I've been talking to some architects, and they've been talking about design. You don't want to swing too far the other way, obviously. But yes, the ultimate goal is to bring it down. You want something fair. We got 16 feet story height. That's a pretty high story. Is there ways that we can reduce that and then offsets what we're talking about versus taking something away? But you want it to be more appeal. You want it to look better. Okay, there's, again, like to your point, you're getting 2-story flat, massive walls too. So not only is it the height issue, but you get a blank, maybe some windows, but you're getting this, overwhelming kind of wall that you're staring at too on the other side. So it's really 2 things. It's what happens to that side and what does the height look like.
I was also going to add in that the massing is very important if once you get really large structures, and it isn't just the drawing that I included shows sort of an angle, but some communities will have design criteria based on, like, once it's up a certain height, then that next level up, next floor has to be pushed in a little bit, and that helps to make the design less boxy. It improves the appearance of it also.
And you don't need as big of a roof as you go smaller up.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be as high.
So, and I've worked in some communities where they did this, just the overall. Once you got over 25 feet or 40 feet, whatever that zoning district was, I think it was similar to this. It was 1 foot for every 2 feet above. And so most people didn't end up going above that. I don't know if that was market or what it was. But again, that's always seemed kind of punitive, that you shrink the rest of it at the part that isn't really affecting you when it's the light that's higher. So maybe the wedding cake style is, the cake style tiered is a little bit better approach probably to address that.
This is Dan. I think I would like to see something a lot tighter on the additional building height that can be added by towers and architectural whatever. There's some monstrosities here that look like something out of a Charles Addams cartoon, that they've added little Gothic towers and things on top, and I don't know how we ever let that happen. But
So the code allows 15 feet.
Yeah.
Plus there's a square footage limitation. I think it's 150 for...
For 250 for non-habitable space, 150 for habitable roofed towers.
So there's an area, plus there's the height, and I think one of the first things to do is limit that. So what I've been hearing from, I guess, the design community is, and if you go to page 95, maybe I can kind of draw you a mental picture of this. What you don't want to do is lose the changes in facade that make a roof line or make a building interesting, right? So if you look at the gabled as an example, having a a bump out in the middle of that roof, breaks up the roof line and creates some architectural interest. What you don't necessarily want is that bump out to then be 15 feet high and overwhelming your neighbor, or it's for 3/4 of the roof. So that's, we got to balance it. So my thought was either reducing that 15 feet to a set number, 7, 10, 5, whatever you want, or having it tied to within a couple feet of the peak of the roof, you know what I mean? So that there's some kind of relationship there where there's not this massive tower sticking up on top of a massive roof. So I'm tying those two things together, those appurtenances and the roof line itself.
Just to follow up on Dan's question, how many of those are non-habitable? I mean, is it easy for you all in the architectural community to know that they're not using these architectural features to actually have habitable space?
They turn into offices, they turn into,
Yeah.
It's really the details, I guess, of the rest of the plan. For example, if somebody, I'll always use this example, if somebody has created a 2,000 square foot attic with 15-foot ceilings and has an elevator and stairway going to it,
And a beautiful view of the ocean.
and in electrical, and
Is
fans.
there a way we can make your life easier in denying those?
Some of that is, again, some of that was dictated on, they had the same kind of roof as what you see in the gable, but added 2 appurtenances, I guess if you want to call them, basically bump outs for windows to allow light into this storage area for whatever reason. And that adds to the mass inside, right, to the amount of square footage you can, because essentially what you're doing is instead of having a peak kind of A-frame, you're extending that out and creating more of a flat roof that gives it more of a box inside. It's hard to redevelop inside of an attic space that's kind of an A-frame, but again, they're so massive that you can still get 2,000 square feet of clean space. It's more rectangular. So what they were doing is trying to make it more squared. That, I don't know that in that example, we would be able to prevent that other than being diligent on trying to remove access during the permitting process. There's other ones that are offices and extra bedrooms that are, they're harder to regulate. Height, I don't think would make a difference. Going from a 15-foot to a 9-foot limit, you're still going to get these extras. So, between this and the building code, it's a constant back and forth with our plan review staff to make sure that we're all kind of reviewing the same thing, because building code has different set of definitions and different criteria, so we're trying to piece them together. But I think ultimately, to answer your question, is if we can work on some similar language, wouldn't you say, if we don't have so many different terms and maybe relied on some of the terminology that, say, building code uses of what is an attic space, maybe we could help better define that space. Because right now, the two don't match at all.
What is a reasonable house size, I guess? I mean, I hate to put it in those terms because we're talking about if we make changes here, we're limiting sizes of houses here. And, you have some people who believe a 2,000 square foot house is appropriate. You have people who think that 10,000 square foot house is appropriate. So I'm trying to, because we are going to end up, if we start changing these heights and such, that change that to a reasonable, and are we opening ourselves up to some trouble? If we are now limiting what people can truly do on their property and height, and I want a 10,000 square foot house, but by code, I can only have a 9,000 square foot house because I can't do this, but I really want, I guess those are the questions but you allowed it to happen before.
Well, I think that we can look at other communities and see how they've accomplished this. And there are quite a few different ways to look at this. And, if you can go to a community and say, this all seems reasonable. We're not taking away rights from people. I think that's one way to look at it. What we have right now is not comparable to most communities. So I think that you could easily see some changes that other communities have implemented that were reasonable and still allowed people to develop, didn't take away rights.
One of the things I'd like to, I get we have the setbacks, and that creates our box. And everybody's going to build their max box that they can get there because the land value is so expensive and it costs so much to build. You got to do it out to the max degree. And we don't want to lose people to either side of us to make their islands better, bigger, whatever, or more popular to go to because they have the bigger houses. What I think there's options that we should consider is possibly, I know we all have the height elements, but if they are willing to go in, maybe they can go up. Because then it would create, instead of having 7-foot side setbacks, if they gave us 10-foot side setbacks, they could take that, 8 feet that they pulled in on both sides and create the office up on top or whatever. But my point is, it's not going to block anybody's view, but it will give us air corridor, view corridor, and a different look of a building. In my opinion, that would be of more interest than the wall-to-wall boxes 7 feet by, to the neighbor's property that we're going to have, because that's what they can have. And they're always going to build it out to the max because they're paying too much for the land.
And I think you make an excellent point in that we don't talk enough about setbacks. We talk about it in reference to going up. And for years, there's a big push, especially by tract developers, your Lennar Homes or whatever, subdivision type developers, to push for smaller and smaller side setbacks.
Right.
But that was internal to
Right,
a
a
community that
neighborhood.
they're all essentially going
Right.
to be the same.
Yeah.
Pushing back on maybe 10 is a better size, maybe 8 is a better, the 7.5. Sometimes you can get 5 depending on the lot. That is, I think, a component to this that has to work hand in hand with that.
Yeah, but I don't want to do that overall.
Sure.
I mean, to change the buildings from all being big, huge, tall, skinny boxes to having a box that does, like a wedding cake go in, which would make it just more interesting than to have everybody, because they're going to build to the max.
Well, and 40% is a max too. So remember, you have different things. You have your setbacks,
Mm-hmm.
which somewhat does dictate your box, but you also have the 40% lot coverage for the building. And then you have this height issue. So all three of those things really work together. And you frankly have differences between the V zone side and the A zone side because of the way
Bonita
that those are
doesn't have
built.
that 40%, do they?
I don't remember if it's 40. I've seen 35 in a lot of communities. 40, that's kind of in that standard.
Yeah, the other thing is, that I was thinking about was that I know there's been talk about if they open up the view corridor at the bottom, that they could maybe go up. Well, to me, that doesn't make any sense because everybody's going to come in later and have, for a variance of, oh, well, now we need to have ground, a garage because we have too much stuff and it's all being, missiles or we have to have handicap, whatever, so that they need to have all this, stuff for ADA and all that kind of stuff that would add. And I don't want to see that as an option because I think properties look cleaner when all their stuff is inside.
But remember, it's designed so that if there's a storm, all that stuff is going somewhere.
Well-
Because the walls break away.
Well,
You know what I mean?
that's
So-
true.
Right.
The water comes through, but I don't think the
So there's no
walls
flood,
really
there's no
break away.
flood protection benefit necessarily to the enclosing of that space below, other than it privatizes that storage is essentially what it is.
Have we ever seen a ground level breakaway?
But all the V-zone stuff is designed for breakaway.
I know, but I mean, have you
But
ever
is it
seen one
really?
really happen?
I haven't seen a storm that caused one.
Is somebody going
I-
behind and checking this? Because a ground floor with cinder block and rebar in it is not breaking away, with the rebar and everything they're putting in, the reinforcement
It
is
might go
not
through the
breaking
little
away.
holes, but it doesn't break away those walls. I mean, I will say older buildings, I saw 4200 Estero where it broke away a portion of theirs, but, because a tree came through it. But other than that,
Well, for the record, they're designed to break away. There's no rebar in a V-zone below in concrete. I even look for that in curbing along your driveways, frankly. So we are implementing that requirement. Rebar is not allowed in concrete in your V-zones. It needs to break up. But anyway, so 40%, building footprint, your setbacks, and then height, obviously, of different, how they approach that height are the three kind of components that work together.
I think height, with the flood, with the way FEMA is working, buildings are going to keep going up. I mean, the 18 feet becomes 19 feet, it's going to become 22 feet. I mean, buildings are going to keep going up. So I think the biggest issue right now, at least that I hear, is the box. How everything looks like a Death Star. So I'd be really in favor of the massing, so you get the view corridors next door. You can still have your height. We all know the height's going to go up, but it's the view corridors and the setbacks where, just as in this diagram, those are more preferable, I think, to the boxes. And I think that would be something we need to angle toward. But I also agree that the definition of height, I mean, we saw that with the Margaritaville. We had 4 to 5 different people thinking where the height was measured from. So I think that needs to become a lot easier.
Very difficult.
Well, but again, because part of that was, we're talking real height versus
Right.
measured
Roof
height,
height.
right? So,
And architectural.
and that's where we got into basically designing the roof line on that, because that was affecting total height in relation to a fixed bridge or something like that, whereas this is all conceptual when it's talking about from base flood, essentially.
I don't want to get to the point where we all have flat roofs everywhere, because I think that's really ugly. And I think it's really hard to keep those roofs on in the storms that we have with the winds, because if a little bit comes up, the whole thing's going.
I agree we should lower it down from 15 feet. I mean, that's a little much.
I think it would have to be based really on the width of the building, because you don't want it to be, a big building will look like a mansard roof if you bring the roof down too far. So you want to have, but maybe it can require different angles or peaks or, bump outs or something to make some architectural design interest other than, just a big, triangle.
And that's similar to, again, I hate to use it, but the Margaritaville conversation where along the street, if you have one mass, same wall, breaking it up, having it recess, bump out, and maybe that is something we can look at adding to this, which is like every, once you're over 50 feet, you have some kind of recessed.
Or recessed, or I can't imagine us all having Cape Cod houses around here, but, that have the different fronts, that they could be porches, they could be whatever, but just to have some kind of interest, at least on the fronts of buildings, so that we don't have just flat slabs all the way up.
If I may, I think that Member Safford, you're talking about, there's actually 2 separate but related issues here. One is the, again, overall height, and then it's that 15-foot architectural treatment, and I think your comment was, well, that needs to come down.
That needs to come down.
And that's, separate and distinct from direction that you would give staff on, well, what's the overall height?
Right.
Or the up.
Well, yeah, I actually combined about 3 different thought processes there, but number 1, the massing, I'd like to see that. Number 2, I'd like to have a firm definition of what the height is. And then thirdly, lowering that 15 feet for the architectural stuff. I think 8 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet's maybe 10.
That's still pretty big. I
But
guess
10
the
is
bigger
a
question
better
is,
than
I'm just throwing a number,
15.
That's why I mentioned relating that to the peak of the roof, right? So that there's some kind of, whether it's up to a foot above the peak of the roof, if it's, an area of up to whatever it was, 250 square feet, something like that. There's things that we could do that are more architecturally based. But again, to that is, I think that the code was written to create this architectural interest by adding that, and it's kind of done the opposite of just creating this mass, whereas we can do something with the roof line needs to be broken up, right? So every 50 feet or 40 feet or something has to be done. I think the architects I've talked to, that's what they want to do. They want to design something interesting, not necessarily just a tower or something.
Right, and I think when you get more architects involved in it, you're looking at, even though the house is big, it doesn't the perception is it's not that big box, right? So if it's got some curves to it, it's got some angles, but it's narrowing up, I think that's more appealing than just this massive thing. And I think that's where the whole community wants to go, and I'm positive. I don't know, except for the 28 people that own those huge boxes, I think you want to see us move forward and get a good definition.
you know, those huge boxes are what is driving the building development is.
They're always going
that-
to come, Jane.
They are,
You just lower it a little bit, they're still going to come.
So floor height is
They've already
also,
built
There's
Bonita,
no
they've
more
built-
sand. They're
They've
still
built Bonita,
coming.
they've built everywhere, and they're coming here.
floor height is also something we can look at to see if it's an appropriate level, which I haven't done an analysis of that, but that also adds to the maximization of the square footage. And if not, if you're just interested in total height, we can leave it at that, but,
But
Now,
yeah,
is the,
Laura
oh,
here.
go ahead, Lori, sorry.
Because 16 feet per floor is pretty substantial.
can be, yes.
We're talking, so 16 feet, you want to look at the 16 feet per floor, massing, look at something massing,
Total,
And at
mean height, total
Mean
height. I
height.
think
Firm
is-
mean height.
a firm mean height measured off of,
I like the
the top of the roof ledge.
but
Yeah, I don't think the eave is
halfway
working.
across, the median,
That's mean height.
yeah. I like that as a measurement.
She was talking to me. It's usually me.
so
Done speaking.
what's the question?
Well,
You-
we're
you
just
like-
kind of giving them some direction right now. And Lori wanted to talk about looking at the 16-foot floor, getting rid of or reducing the 15-foot exterior
Architectural features.
architectural features.
Architectural, yeah.
Look at massing as a solution here too as well.
Both in height and in bulk.
Right.
Because
the mass.
they're asking
Yeah.
for some direction here, and I wanted to make sure that we gave them some direction as to what we're feeling here.
Well, how are you coming up with 16-foot floors?
That's in the code 34631A1B.
But that, wait a minute.
16 feet in height here.
It's the first page of the Exhibit A.
Look at 90, or 98.
So, but if they had 16-foot floors, they could only really have two-story over parking because they have to meet the 40-foot height limit.
Yeah, but if we're talking about
That
mass,
doesn't include the roof.
Well, but, okay, so you're saying another 16,
I mean, that goes into also the 25. So essentially, most places, it's a 25 feet above flood, 2 stories. You're essentially at 12 and a half each story, which is relatively tall. Or you can end up with a 16 and a 8, I guess, or, 9. There's different ways you could do it, but I think sometimes the taller initial floor that's right in that adjacent property's face is somewhat of a driver too. I mean, once it's over a certain, you want light to come through, but once it's over a certain height, it all just looks like one big massive building as it is. Just, again, it's just another component that, you can leave that alone and let the designers figure it out of how these puzzle pieces fit together. Or just another thing to consider. And I would say the more we adjust, it's probably the more, we're getting into more designing than the general picture that we want to paint.
are you saying don't look at the 16, but come up with an overall height limit and make floors in there as they
I
want?
think we should look at it and just compare, and, I don't know what the 16 was based on, where it came from, if that's a general design standard for,
well, I think it's a lot of the fact that a lot of homes were built with like bedrooms here, and then the living room is open and you can view down to it to give that height and a design standard from really a long time ago. But I don't think that so many people are building that today. I think they're taking the height and doing the whole floor as high as they can do it, and then going up and doing the next whole floor to get the mass square footage. But, I hate to create something that makes us all look like we're in a gated community and they all look the same. We just have different colored houses, too.
We're already kind of going that way. If you look at those houses out there on Estero.
Well, that's because we
They
don't.
kinda already
that's-
look that way.
That's because we
Big,
don't
boxy,
offer
gnarly.
any choices, and people are going to build the structure as big as they can because that's what is almost required based on what it costs to build and what it costs to buy the land. So you're not going to get people to go, oh, I paid $2 million for the land, I think I'll build a little cottage. It'd be so cute there. They're not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. I mean, if you look at our design standards in our book as it is now, they're all little cute cottages with porches and drive around to the garage in the back. That's not happening. So, we need to throw that out, start over, and look at what's realistic and offer options so that we don't have wall-to-wall cement down Estero Boulevard. If we don't offer something to change the height and the look of it by stair-stepping in and allowing it to either go up or something different, then that's all we're going to have.
That's where I think the massing comes in the most.
Well, but if you're discounting the value of the property if you reduce what everybody else can have as a standard. I mean, it's kind
You're
of like.
looking at it from a realtor's perspective, and I respect that, but we're looking at this from a community perspective and the vision of what our island's going to look like.
But we aren't a gated community, and we do
That's
have
true.
standards in place now. And by reducing those standards, you're devaluating the property because they can't have what they could have someplace else in Lee County.
You refer to like maximum square
They
footage?
can go someplace else
Okay.
in Lee County. I
Well,
mean, they're
that's
on the
true, but
beach.
the
You
point
make a
is,
choice.
private property rights to take away things that people have bought. I mean, the people who live in the house now have the right to continue living in their house as it is, or if they want to rebuild it, they bought it knowing that their setbacks were this and that and the other. By us saying, okay, now, we're going to make you this and this and this, and now you can have, everybody else in Lee County can build, 5,000, but you can only build 3,500.
Fort Myers uses massing, so it's not everywhere in Lee County.
And Sanibel
Well,
is very restrictive.
Fort Myers doesn't use massing,
Yeah, it does.
Sure says right here it does.
Option number 2.
but it's an option. It's not.
No, this is the options for us to consider as we move forward.
We can mix and match these. It's really just kind of trying to categorize them.
I think that you get a choice to live here on the
Well,
beach.
Jen,
and
I
you have
think
a
maybe we
choice to
come up
live
with a
off the
solution
beach.
where you get a little bit more height. I mean, let's face it, if you're allowing 15 feet, right, for architectural stuff, lower that down, give them a little bit more height, but include the massing in there.
Well, I think it's kind of like, a handicap ramp. You need to have whatever grade based on the square foot of the base of it to go up to make it look interesting. So based on that, you come up with a number that says if your building is this height, you can't go up 16 stories. You could only go up 16 feet. You could only maybe go up 10 or 8. But based on the width of the top of the house is what your height could be, as opposed to, if it's this big, then it's going to look like a mansard roof, because if we don't require any, cutting up of the roof like on page 99. Those roofs show interest. Yes, there's cupolas and there's things up there that, are most likely not inhabitable, but they give interest. Do you guys not like cupolas and stuff like that?
But I don't think that's the problem. What we're discussing is that when we have given them the right to do this, there's 3, 4 of them, and then all of a sudden, just drive down here where they put 3, 4 of them up there, and all of a sudden it's a massive roof line again, because they put 3 architectural pieces because they're not putting 1. There's a house just a street over that has that nice looking top up there. It's probably an office, and it looks fine. It doesn't block the sun. I think that's the other piece that we have to remember is as we get higher, we're starting to block sun corridors too. And that's part of the view corridor as well for the rest of us that are on the island that drive up and down this island. that give it the open and airy feel of being, you actually feel like you're near the water. If we start going too high and too massive, we start losing that too as well. It's part of the view corridor.
That's why
And
we
we wanna-
offer options.
So let me
But I
ask
think
you
we're
this,
trying to
Jane.
protect that a little bit more by doing the massing and going, okay, if you want to go up, you're going to go in some, so we have some more less of the canyoning effect that happens like when you're down driving through Bonita and you can't tell if there's water there, you can't see the sun, you can't tell.
Right.
So, by looking at going in the massing, we're still allowing that light through too as well. I do like the massing idea as well.
Well, and I do too. I'm not saying not to address it, but to give the option to go up with the massing if they're going to come in,
Agree.
give
And
them the
but-
top.
But take away some of that 15-foot.
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. The top
Are you
should be
getting
based on the
kinda where we're
grade
all
that it
coming
needs to
from?
make it look reasonable in a pitch.
Yeah, I think
I still think there's
the
no
cupola,
limit
I was
though,
trying to,
too.
couldn't remember the word, thank you for saying that. The cupola is beneficial, and it's also a pain for us because it creates
I know.
potentially habitable space, but it's what breaks up the roof line.
Right.
And is not massive. It's not overbearing, whereas, that 15-foot tower, so to speak, I don't think we've had many 15, but that 12 to 14 range, that can be overwhelming to some degree.
Jason, would it be hard to come up with a formula that says, if your house is 30 feet wide, if your house is 50 feet wide, the grade of the roof of the house should be this standard? I mean, there has to be some kind of a standard to make it.
Yeah, there's 30 different ways we could do it. I think it'll just be getting something written down, and then you're going to like it or not like it, and then go back and redrafting. I mean, I don't know if I kind of get the picture where you're going. We have to play with what you're measuring a little bit. So Sarah and I were talking about, is there 2 different height definitions depending on whether you're tiering or not, or do you stick with one and then have other exceptions to that height? So maybe your height is 30 feet instead of 25 feet if you do the massing option. So there's different ways that we
That's
can
what
do
I mean.
this.
I think if you have options, they'll choose options as opposed to losing square footage.
I
And-
think the result has to be substantial, because otherwise it sounds, if I was a person in the public, I would hear, you want to increase height when we're trying to reduce height. But reducing, it's not really just, and that's why I want to be clear, it's not really just reducing height, it's reducing the impact of that wall and the mass.
And I don't know, I don't know how we could take a poll, but I do think most people would prefer to see something more interesting than a big cement wall.
At the end of the day, tiered back and more interesting in my experience, has a more positive impact. People will look at that same building and say, that looks smaller.
And frankly, I wouldn't want to live in it because I don't want to go up on all of those stairs, but the point is, some
They have
people do.
elevators.
Always
They
elevators.
have
but-
elevators.
I know.
But
There
you know
ain't
my
any
point.
way
Wait for
walking
those
steps
either.
around
My
here
point
in
is, you
those
can take a
houses.
massive building in the same footprint, but tier it and do something architecturally with it and put them side by side, and people will always think one is much bigger than the other. It's perception at the ground level is essentially what it comes down to, in light, like you said, light impacts. Did you have something?
I completely agree. I think that there are a whole basket of options that we could provide, and, if you go with this, then you get that, carrots and sticks.
Right.
I
And-
think
and I-
that's
you know, I
the
don't wanna
key
be-
to resolving
I
some
don't
of
want to
these
make it so
issues.
tight that we have the same thing everywhere. And that's why I'm saying if there were options to go in, I think people would go in and go higher if they can go higher, but I don't want it to just be roof line. I'm saying don't lose the square footage of what they could do, but make the building more interested and stair step it in. And
I think that there are quite a few communities that have very good standards that we
Mm-hmm.
could take a look at, that have beautiful designs and a variety of designs. They don't all look the same. You don't drive down the street and think it's a tract subdivision.
Right.
You drive down the street and you see architectural design, and I think that's what we do want here.
right, I agree.
I think the definition also should clarify, I mean, all of our height, overall height limitations are based on measuring from the base flood elevation.
Correct. There are no grade to the top of structure measurements.
Yeah, and that's something I think we ought to look at, because, for example, in Fort Myers, it's measured from the finished grade. That the vertical distance measured from the finished grade level, and not an artificial base flood elevation?
And my guess is that it was driven by the difference that we have between V and A zones. And probably because you have, if we had a zoning district that was only in an A and not in a V, then you could assign it to that. But because we have these flood zones plus zoning, you have some overlap there. But I understand, it may be a two-step process. It may be both.
Yeah, the drawings that I have say finished grade or minimum flood elevation, so I think that it depends on the type of area that you're in, AE versus VE, because there's a big difference in height requirements for those.
Only going to get higher.
Some places, yes. But no, I understand your point. And sometimes, depending on your opinion, it's relative to where they are. Maybe not necessarily this lot, but if this lot is next to something else, then yeah,
Right.
that real height, I guess I'll call it, matters. Okay. I mean, we can play with that, and you don't want them to conflict. You want it to work in the box, but sometimes you got to put it in place and see what happens and adjust as you go. But
Would you say most new construction is 11 foot or 12 foot, or what is it?
per floor,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably 11, pushing 11, 12. It really depends on.
What was the question you asked?
What most new construction is coming in at per floor, 11, or
Oh.
11 or 12,
I mean, I've seen some 9 to 10.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it just,
mean-
it's really, but you're right, because of window place and because of that,
Yeah.
the height of those floors makes a difference for people too.
correct.
Well, I don't think there should be any limitation on what an individual floor should be.
I agree. I just was wondering.
But I think we're concerned about overall height,
Right.
yeah,
And that's why I was just looking at,
yeah.
that you have to have the height for whatever the flood zone is for that area. And then
Right.
those two on top, we don't want to limit it to be, the box, but I'm just curious if most of them are coming in at that range that would allow that much extra
Frankly,
space.
if I think if you got, for whatever reason, got rid of the number of story limitation, because you have that component too, you would probably see smaller floors, right? So people have no incentive to
That's exactly what I'm saying,
decrease
yeah.
the floor size, because if I could get 3 stories into a 25-foot box, I'm probably going to try, as far as if I'm trying to resell or if I'm trying to increase the value, so to speak, because you increase your internal square footage. To your point about that, so
Well, and because what I've seen is like in the new constructions of homes that are in that, 60-foot wide home lot, that what really gets lost is like the storage and the whatever, so then everything seems to be, outside or, I mean, it's just not long-term living is what happens.
Gotcha.
It becomes a rental because nobody can put their stuff away. 'Cause- I know, but that's the point, because they can't, if they could change if they could take the square footage and change the shape of the house, they could do it better inside to make it,
I kind of disagree there. They can do anything they really want
I know,
inside that
but
box. I
it's-
mean,
it really,
No, man, they got 16-foot high attics.
Yeah, they can do
Well,
whatever. There's
Well,
plenty of stories there.
to your
I'll show
point,
you a house and give
Yeah.
you an
You
idea.
the market right now is dictating some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably where some of that is coming from, obviously, that's the cost, as you said, land values and all that is driving some of
it's-
those decisions, which aren't necessarily
Right.
long-term decisions, they're
Right.
today decisions. Understood.
Discussion, Jim, you have anything?
I think whatever we do, once we determine our goals, we can build in incentives, I think, to help further those goals. And I think that's where we can be creative. And I would like you to continue to look for ways to help you all make sure that non-habitable areas remain non-habitable, because I could see a lot of creep going in there because everybody wants to get that extra space. And I know it puts you in a tough spot, but if there's tools and revisions that could help you, I think that could maybe address that issue.
We appreciate that, because that's the battle.
Have you seen any construction with, say, the attic at the lower floors so that they have the height with the views?
So,
Because we measure height to that, to the eave, they tend to try to pile it on top. And also, they don't want to keep some things downstairs where they don't have direct access to it. It seems like that's usually the way it goes. And since we do measure to the eave and the top floor, the top floor, then they have that space up there that they can use, so then they just try to maximize that space in whatever way they can, since it doesn't add on to the height of their building.
Once you put the trusses on and see what happens, opening of that space, that's where, well, okay, if we add in a cupola here and there, then all of a sudden now we've really got some usable space. That's what's happening. But again, it all ties back to the size of the building from bottom to top creates this massive span of roof trusses, which creates quite a space underneath. Or flat roofs. But
No, no,
we recognize
no.
that that's not the direction we want to go.
All right.
Okay, so.
Okay, so I think we've got some of that, I think it's excellent feedback as far as us. We'll try to develop something, maybe 2 options out of this, then we can start mixing and matching it even out of that and fine tuning. So we'll start developing.
And also give us some pros and cons of what could potentially happen if we choose A versus choosing B. You know, just some scenarios that we can see to know what we're voting, what we're deciding on.
And that's a good point, because we've heavily discussed with the outside folks of where, like that 16 feet, where do you measure that to and from? Is it when you want to put in skylights? How do you measure a floor versus when does it become a habitable floor versus non-habitable floor? Are we falsely making them put in a ceiling, but then openings for the skylights when it should be open? So there's different ways that it gets measured internally that is confusing too. So we need to think through what's the pros and cons on that, and we'll try to do that.
I'd like to also see you come back with something about the size of the width of the building or height based on, bringing it in. Because I think that does make a difference, and I mean, there's got to be some kind of scale that makes it to be a mansard, not a mansard roof, a gabled roof. So based on, how, I mean, they come in certain sizes, so I mean, there's got to be a grade that is required for the pitch to run off properly, that we don't want to get below that.
Right, so all that, yes, it depends on mass or the size of it, absolutely. Narrower top, narrower, maybe a higher pitch roof, but narrower, not as overwhelming. Okay.
Anyone else have any other comments, some direction for them? Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to recess as the local planning agency and open as the Historic Preservation Board. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We're now Historic Preservation Board. And I will turn it over to the chair, Scott Safford.
I'm gonna need some help from my vice chair since I was gone from the last meeting, but we did not have a meeting in December. Our next scheduled meeting is January 29th here at 9 a.m. I understand that the cottage is approved.
Yes.
Which is awesome. Thank you, Joanne. That's great news. When are they, do we know when they're going to move it?
Can we discuss that real quick?
Sure.
Just kind of an update. So the council, turns out, I didn't know the rules very well, and I think this is kind of the first one that's been done in a while, so everybody's a little unsure of it. You have this, whatever, Historic Preservation Advisory Board has the say on those. So in the future, if one comes before you, it will not go on necessarily to the town council. However, in this case, it was before them, they discussed it, and there's some confusion over ownership and donation. So we're still, the council passed something and basically said they support your vote. However, they would like confirmation that the receiver and the person sending it is cleared up. So there's some work on that to be done. That is partially the reason why I have not completed the final resolution for your signature, Chair. We will do that once that gets resolved, if it gets resolved.
And this is the Red Shatter Cottage as to whether Orlandini owned it or the previous owner owned it? Is this where the confusion's coming from?
It's the current, I guess, owner of its willingness to give it to the nonprofit and to where to place it. And part of that is because you need his okay, and it's basically, I think we talked about, it's really, it's wood, right? It's a pile of wood, essentially. So he's okay with it if they take it and do some things. So there's a deal between those two sides that has to occur before. So my point being, if it doesn't happen, that we'll bring back before you something just to kind of undo that designation for the record, just to make sure, if for some reason it doesn't fall apart, or if it does fall apart. If it doesn't, then we'll move on smoothly and everything will be fine. But those parties are dealing with that. It's not up to us as a town. There's nothing left for us to do other than
Sure, Russ
coordinate.
Carter will figure it out.
They'll hopefully figure that out, yes.
Because of all this, this is one of our goals for this year is to get a playbook. So when another cottage becomes available, we'll have a process in place whereby it won't take a year and a half. It'll be more streamlined. Obviously, we need a place to land the building. We're working on that. That's a side issue that we're working on, identifying places where future cottages can go. But we're looking at a process where next time this happens, we can say, okay, you need this permit, you got to do this, you got to do that. This is how we do it. So that's one of our goals this year. I have a question for you, Jason. I saw from the minutes from last month, we had asked if we do actually have a budget because we want to do some advertising and
I don't
promotion.
think I figured that budget out. I will email you that. I think, what was the answer on that? I'm sorry, I just drew a blank. There was an answer, and I don't think it was a formal budget. I think we just have to request something.
Right. We want to do promotion for the historic recognition, whether it be a flyer in the water bill. We're talking about a booth at Taste of the Beach, promotional materials, mailing. We're looking at several different things, but we need a budget.
I think the answer, again, I'll correct myself through an email to you all, but I believe the answer was there isn't a line item budget for that, but there is, I think in theory, budgeted money that could be allocated to that.
Okay.
So I will double check on that.
All right, great. And if we'd love for you to be at the next meeting on the 29th. And do you have anything else, Lori?
No, I think that covers what we did.
Turn it back to you. I guess we're
Move
going
to
to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're reconvened as the local planning agency. Next on the item is LPA member items. How about, would you like to start, Jim?
A brief question to Jason for our education of new members. Any update on that? I know you've had your hands full.
New year, new attitude. Yeah, we're going to try to put something together here.
And if it's
I'm
not
trying.
the more grandiose plan that you had, if it's just something where Tim and I could sit down with you for a couple hours.
I am personally inviting both of you individually to come and do that. I will make time for that. I also, again, bigger picture, it might take a couple months to put something together for everybody. It was, once I started looking into what I mentioned last time, it was quite an undertaking. It took them about,
That's a huge undertaking. I
it
think
took them
just-
about 4 months to 5 months to plan it, so.
But if just a couple of us could come and
Yes.
meet, that'd be great. Thank you.
And as always, I think I offered it before, but I'm going to try to set aside as much time on Mondays before this meeting, or we can pick a different date, or if you individually want to come in and talk about the packet, then I'll be happy to do that.
Great, thank you.
And that's for everybody, obviously.
Wondering if we have any update with the joint meeting with the town council? A date?
I believe it's the 17th at 1 PM.
17th of
Yes.
January?
Yeah, I was under the impression that you were notified.
No,
Oh,
I'm out of town.
out of town.
No
Okay.
notification, no emails, no,
So I believe it's 1 PM on the 17th is what the initial date was set.
I had that down, but I didn't, I was going to ask the same question. Is that still on at that point?
So the only thing I mentioned to you is I thought that they were trying to set around an M&P date, that's what happens to be their morning session is their management planning. Because if you remember, their schedule got changed. Normally it would be this Thursday, but this Thursday's council meeting, the M&P got set to the 17th, and they said at 1 o'clock. So I will bring that up.
Anybody else going to be out of town besides the two of us?
the chair and the vice chair.
Yes, ma'am.
That's not good.
A golf day. I'll be here, but
Yeah,
Got to get a different date then.
Yeah.
we need a
Work on
different date.
Mondays.
So do you have a,
Can,
I'll be back on the 20th. When will you come back?
So I believe they're next.
I believe I'm returned that following Monday. It is a family medical issue.
I believe their next MMP is also on the 7th, so I don't know if that pattern is what's,
Well,
but
we do
Joanne
have
is
a,
thinking.
Joanne,
we do.
because we do have a council member here in attendance that can help us out here.
They're on the spot.
Careful attending.
That's right. Okay.
This Thursday?
Joanne Champ for the record. The next M&P will not work because we have board camp after that. Our council meeting is Thursday, and we can, I'll bring it up and we'll reschedule. But it may not have to be, may not be after an M&P then, because we really want to meet with you guys right away. So are there weeks or dates that are really bad for you? Can we at least identify like a no date for you?
I'm out of town the 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Other than that, I'm good.
I'm out the 29th, 30th, and 31st.
Those are, so no 23rd to 25th and no from 29 to 31 preferably, okay? Anything else?
What about the 22nd,
And how about the
23rd?
start of
That's-
February? Although, you know, I'd like to get it in the month of January, so let's try to see if there's some way to get it in between before the 23rd, but not on that date mentioned.
I could do it in the morning. I have to leave in the afternoon on the
Which one?
23rd.
The
23rd. I can do these.
21st is a holiday.
Right, so the council meeting's on the 22nd.
The 22nd or 23rd?
I could do the morning of the 23rd.
I can do
Okay.
the 23rd.
I can do 23rd.
I can do the 23rd.
Okay, well, I'll bring it to council on Thursday, and we'll try to have a new meeting ASAP.
Yeah,
Thank
appreciate
you.
the
Look
help
forward
on
to
that.
it. Thank you.
Okay, I also want to say I am thrilled that Lee County did not go forward with tearing apart the park at the other side of the bridge and putting the trolleys where they are temporarily, since it got that whole thing cleaned up for us sooner than it probably would have taken. And I love having that open and at least looking much cleaner than it did before. And I think that spot's working for that. It's very nice. And I love seeing the open-air trolleys running. So I'm very happy about those things. I don't know how many people went to Times Square for New Year's. I did go down there for a bit of the time, and it was very festive and packed and entertaining to watch. Anybody else? Happy New Year to everybody.
I second about the over the bridge area. It looks fantastic. And just a report from local businesses, we've had a great Christmas holiday and first week of January. It's been unbelievable. So it's been really good.
Nothing.
I have nothing.
I have to say it was a pleasant surprise coming back onto the island after being away for weeks, to see that at the end of the bridge, all cleaned up and nice, and no more that green barrier and the crap that was in that lot, for lack of better term, for what that looked like. It really is a very inviting entrance into the island now versus
Well,
what it was.
Versus what it was.
Yeah. I don't have anything other than that, having been away for a while. Next on agenda, LPA attorney items. Welcome, new attorney.
That's a technical planning term, by the way.
What?
Crap.
Crap?
Yes, technical, yes.
As I indicated at the beginning of the meeting, it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all. I've provided my card to each one of you all during the break. Please feel free to give me a call on any matter, any question that you may have, or an email. You know, like most of us, I live with this thing attached to me, and generally am answering emails even late into the night sometimes. And again, you can feel free to please, to give me a call. Probably the easiest way to reach me is on my mobile number. I will also be here on a regular basis. So again, if you have any questions, reach out to me, and we'll try and get them answered as quickly as possible.
Jason?
Nothing.
Any items that we'd like to see on next month's agenda besides the two that we push forward? And it sounds like we've got a meeting working with town council.
So that meeting is on Monday, that you'll discuss this, so Thursday, so we'll hopefully have an email to us on Friday or Thursday.
Yes, I guess so,
Super.
on the new date.
I have one more bit of housekeeping that we do at every meeting, and that is the next council meetings, council, who can attend those? Which it looks like there's one, did you say Thursday?
So there's, yes, Thursday, this Thursday is a council meeting, and then the 22nd.
These things aren't going to be going forward, so, right?
Correct.
Still need to be there.
Right, so the special exception wouldn't be until later, after we fix all this.
Tied up for the next probably month that I can fill in later.
You can do so Lori's on the 22nd. I can attend part of the meeting, and so I will look at the agenda on Thursday, if no one else can attend those. It's a small meeting, okay, so
We don't have anything for
for
the LPA
LPA.
stuff, right.
Input.
Oh, do we need to go? Do we need to go?
Variance, do we have the one?
Pool setback.
Pool
Oh,
setback,
I'm sorry, yes, pool setback.
I'll be there,
I did forget about that.
okay. So I can be there for part of that, then, if no one else can attend.
Lori said,
22nd.
oh, I see.
We have something on the 10th, on Thursday. Okay? So now we got that housekeeping aside. All right, public comment. Wow.
It is a short meeting.
New year,
All
new
right,
Leon.
and we are out of here. I adjourn this meeting. I have a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.